Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to look at an article that has just popped up on the direct.com entitled Marvel Studios has hired an official MCU timeline keeper, and it's an exclusive to the direct. I love the direct. It's a fantastic source of information. I check on it multiple times a day because they always have such great stories. And this one about a timeline keeper sure got me curious. So let's dive right in and see what we can learn. So in the article, which, by the way, if you haven't read the article, go check it out after this video. But in the article, they mention that there is someone tracing the Marvel timeline. Jessica Gao, who's the head writer and producer of She-Hulk, fantastic series, by the way, love She-Hulk. She confirmed that She-Hulk is post-Endgame, and she confirmed that a person whose job it is to trace the timeline of everything works at the MCU, works for Marvel. Now, she doesn't necessarily say when this person was hired, were they hired, 10, 15 years ago, or were they hired 10, 15 minutes ago? It's not real clear, because with some of the timeline issues, I might think it was 10, 15 minutes ago. But nonetheless, very encouraging that Marvel has someone there whose job it is to be the timeline keeper. But then I get concerned even as we read the rest of her quote. Note that she says, and we checked with him a lot about where the timing is. And so it's like the show is a few years after Endgame. That's just not enough for me. A few years after Endgame. 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? And I'm not trying to be picky. I'm bringing it up because there are literally 14 movies or TV shows, 14, that are placed after Endgame in basically a 2-year span of time. So it's not that we Marvel fans are trying to be difficult or a pain. We're just trying to figure out where everything fits together. And again, it's not worth getting so wrapped up that you don't enjoy everything. It's most important thing is just enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But it helps when we know where things fit in time. So that's why I try to do it in some of my videos, try to lay this out, because it just helps to understand the overall timing. So I'm really worried that she would then give a quote where apparently she doesn't know where it takes place. And again, this is not Jessica Gao's fault. I'm not knocking on her. I'm saying Marvel needs to give her better information before she goes and does an interview. This just isn't right. The minute you talk about a timeline keeper, you can't turn around and give a vague timeline. Just weird. But anyway, let's go a little more in the article. Supposedly there is a very long timeline scroll. Now this isn't not a scroll, mind you, but a scroll. Now this is an earlier quote from John Watts, who did Homecoming, in fact did all of the Spider-Man MCU movies. And he mentions that there is an actual scroll that they unrolled for me. Eric Carroll, it was his first job at Marvel, to work on a timeline and see where things line up and to see where they didn't line up. Again, that's very encouraging. You hear that and you go, oh, this is great. And then you realize that Homecoming had one of the worst offenses to the timeline that's ever been produced, which was the 8 years later graphic trying to place Homecoming 8 years after Avengers. I mean, everyone knew that was wrong. It's 4 years, not 8. So it wasn't even close. So this scroll seems to exist, but yet let them get it that far off. Again, every time we get a good quote that encourages us, then we see something crazy happen. But anyway, it says that it's a very long timeline and starts at the beginning of time. So that's all great to hear. I'm unsure whether people then are using it. But anyway, a little more on that 8 years later. I believe that's the title card that broke Marvel's back and made them realize they got to fix this. And in fact, the Direct's article brings that up, that Kevin Feige promised in late 2017 that they would be publishing an official chronology, which again is great. Now, the article then goes on to say that they haven't produced it yet, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I do think we did get a timeline. It just may not be the timeline that people want. Now, first of all, there was a timeline that came out in 2012, and that one was right around the time of Avengers, and as you can tell, it's very detailed, but it did have some ways to derive the years that things happened. For example, we learned how much distance in time between Captain America and the end of Iron Man when he said, "I am Iron Man." We also learned the amount of time between him saying, "I am Iron Man," and Fury's big week, which is the week where Iron Man 2, Incredible Hulk, and Thor all seem to happen at the same time. In fact, it breaks out that week by day. So this was really cool. You kind of wish Marvel had kept doing this, to be honest. This is the scroll, right? Which would be a long scroll if this continued on. Now, I do believe what Kevin Feige was referring to is in 2018, they did release a timeline. Not as detailed as the previous one, but this time it had years associated. So that's pretty cool. So when they released their 10-year celebration book, it had this timeline in it. Unfortunately, even this timeline, though, had a few errors. It lists Black Panther as happening in 2017, which we know that it's got to be much closer to Civil War, because there he is in that picture watching the news story, T'Challa watching the news story of his father being killed in Civil War. So they eventually did move Black Panther to 2016, in fact, right after Civil War. Likewise, Infinity War was listed in 2017, and we know that's not right. It eventually moved to 2018. So again, if this scroll exists, it's got a couple issues. So anyway, then of course we have the Disney Plus timeline, which I happen to like it myself and don't have as many issues as many do, but I would say in general, fandom doesn't trust this thing. And honestly, back to Jessica Gao's quote, I think that's why. I mean, when she says things like, well, it's a couple years after Endgame, well, you can see there's a lot going on after Endgame. And this doesn't even have No Way Home or Thor Love and Thunder on there yet. So anyway, bottom line, I'm very encouraged that there is a timekeeper. I'm very encouraged that people go and consult with that timekeeper. That's fantastic. But the timekeeper, in my mind, needs to give the creative team better intel when they go to do interviews. Give us faith that they really have a grasp. I mean, wouldn't it have been great if she'd gone out and said, oh yeah, it's a year and a half after Endgame, it fits between Moon Knight and Miss Marvel. Wow, I think we would all be blown away. Now, people may still not agree or may say, no, that's not really where it's placed. But I'm saying at least the creative team and Disney Plus timeline would be in sync. That would be amazing. But they're not. They say completely different things. So anyway, bottom line, I'm very encouraged there's a timekeeper. I'm hopeful that timekeeper will get even more rigorous in keeping that time going forward. And that as we move into phase 5, we're going to see a lot more specificity around the timeline. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this short video. I promised it would be short, so I'm going to close down here. Like it if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel. More videos you can watch and continue to enjoy the ever-expanding, ever-growing Marvel Cinematic Universe.